welcome to Pulse by AlphaWire, the podcast where science and education meet cutting-edge technology and artificial intelligence. My name is Aldo de Pape, and each week I sit down with innovators, thinkers and doers who are working to change our world for the better. Together we explore their journeys, uncover the lessons they've learned, and take the entrepreneurial pulse that drives them on their path to success. This week, I had the great honor of speaking to Caspar Barnes, who is the founder and CEO of AminoChain, an incredible D-side company that is focused on building trust in science and healthcare. Casper, who is of South African and Austrian descent, graduated from University College London, Columbia University, and Harvard University, fascinated by neuroscience, biotechnology, and bioethics. His outlook on what will empower healthcare in the future is absolutely fascinating. Hope you will enjoy my conversation with Caspar Barnes. Yes, and very happy to be here in the digital interview room with Caspar Barnes, founder and CEO of AminoChain. Caspar, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Aldo. Super excited to be here.
Yes, and Caspar, you are really a citizen of the world because you're currently in the UK. You just told me before we clicked recording. You live in the United States, but you are South African. So when I read about you, it's like you're all over the place. You're one that is very hard to pinpoint. Is that intentional?
It is intentional. I mean, it's natural, maybe not intentional, but it's definitely a natural occurrence of just having grown up in one place and moved around a lot. But ons kan ook een beetje Nederlands praten, just because I'm grown up with Afrikaans. So I grew up in Cape Town around 14 years, and then I moved over to the UK for school and for university, and then I eventually moved over to the United States for graduate school. And then when I graduated from my master's programs, I decided to just stay in America and found AminoChain. So that's where we're currently based in New York.
Nice. And there's loads more to that story that I want to dive into, because your journey for AminoChain and kind of your motivation to revolutionize healthcare actually already started when you were very young, because unfortunately you were hit with a disease very early on. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, yeah. That's definitely true. So, I mean, the founding origin of AminoChain is quite complex, but looking back at it, it makes a lot of sense, right? How everything happened. For a reason. What happened was I moved over to Cape Town when I was very young with my mom and my older sister. I was actually born in Austria, and my mom is German and my biological dad is Austrian, just to make things even more confusing.
Oh, wow.
But then I grew up and moved over to Cape Town as a little kid, and I grew up there with my mom and my older sister. And my mom always worked as a philanthropist. She founded a charity called Biobanking, which means thank you in Xhosa, one of the languages in South Africa. The charity basically supported women with HIV and AIDS to get access to antiretroviral treatments, and supported community mothers in the townships to look after kids that would otherwise have no support. And so growing up in Cape Town, my sister and I would spend our weekends regularly in and out of the townships there. And we had very regular discussions around race, privilege, equity, and access, and so on. And so finding ways to give back throughout your career has always been a really big familial and cultural value that is now certainly playing into the vision of AminoChain. The second thing, as you alluded to earlier there, was when I was around 12 years old, I had a malignant melanoma, unfortunately, which was an aggressive type of skin cancer. And I was very lucky because it was caught very early. And I just needed one big operation to remove the tumor. But that experience, of course, threw me into the world of healthcare from a very young age. And I can still remember, missing lessons at school to speak with these doctors, and they would explain the concepts of healthy cells and malignant cells and how cancer spread. And as a little kid, I just listened with wide-eyed fascination and just became in love with biology from that moment. And I knew I had to have a career in medicine somehow. I thought it was unbelievable what I was hearing this medic say. And so, 4 years later, at the age of 16, I already spent my summers working in oncolytic viral vector research. I ended up doing my undergrad in neuroscience and then getting a graduate degree from Columbia and Harvard Medical School in biotechnology and bioethics. And so I've always loved biology since those early days. And the key thing is that when I was waking up from the surgery as a 12-year-old, I can still remember this doctor standing over my bed, and he was holding this biopsy tissue that he removed during the surgery. And I remember thinking, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, I want to keep this thing. Can I take it home? And the doctor said, no, we need to keep this. We need to use it in scientific research. It's a valuable biosample. And I, was too young to fully understand what was going on. But I was like, nah, that thing is mine. Like, what do you mean it's yours? Like, you just took it out of my body. Like, I want to take it home and show my friends. And then he was like, no, we have to keep it and use it in research. And of course, we were asked to sign a consent document, and we did. We handed over this valuable bioasset, and we never saw it again. And many, many years later, when I was at Columbia, I was doing research on B-cell lymphoma tissue. And I was just looking down at the sample thinking, wow, we're generating so much information on this person and their condition, and they have no way of figuring out what we're doing with them. We have no way to return this information to them. And that blew my mind. I thought, how many biosamples are there across how many labs and how many areas of the world? And none of the information generated from research is ever going back to the people that consented and donated in the first place. Yeah. And so that's the origin story of AminoChain. Basically, the more we dug into it, we found out that consent rates are very low. They're as low as 25%. And 84% of the samples that are consented into research today come from people of Caucasian descent, which means that the people that are disproportionately affected from the lack of consenting and donation are marginalized communities and patients of color. And that happens to be the same in the United States, in Europe, and in South Africa, and many different areas of the world. And so creating a better consenting experience, a better, more trustful engagement experience for human research subjects is perhaps the single biggest bottleneck in achieving precision medicine at scale. And that was the origin story of AminoChain. It's just blended a passion for health equity and a desire to give back throughout your career with a love for biology and an interest in emerging technologies. So that's how we got to where we are today.
This is an amazing story. I think we should just stop the interview here because there's already so much to unravel here. And thank you so much for sharing that Casper.
Of course.
I want to go back to kind of when you were in the UK doing your undergraduates, because you had your mind set on medicine from a young age. But then what from medicine to biotechnology? What kind of made you drive more towards biotech? Did you want to become a biotech entrepreneur, or was there something else going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And to be very honest, maybe I shouldn't say this on the record, but I might still have med school in me somewhere. I don't know. I feel like I'm not done.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. I just feel like I just love learning, and particularly love learning things that shouldn't have any interdisciplinary overlap. Right. So the idea of linguistics, I love languages, and moved around and I love to just say random things in other languages. And, biology, I guess I just love learning that and everything that goes with it and how it's applied. And that would be medicine. Right. And so I've now gotten to the point where I did a dual bachelor in London, and I ended up studying economics and neuroscience. And that was meant to leave these doors open where I can still go to medical school. I can still go down the research route. I could still do anything in the business field if I wanted to. And then after this sort of broad Bachelor of Arts and Sciences, I then ended up doing 3 different master's degrees, which is probably not a very smart choice or not a very economic decision. Yeah. I should have just done like 1 PhD or something, right? And then become specialized in it. But I didn't do that. There was all just different subjects. One was business, one was biotechnology, and one was bioethics. But I feel like, there's something in between the life sciences, as in like biotechnology and everything happening on the molecular level and in the wet lab, all the way down to how it's applied in clinical settings. So that would mean, being a doctor and what drugs to prescribe and so on. And then somehow connect that with the economics of all of it. And how does the money flow in between, and how can you innovate in the 2 sectors there? So I want to just be across all those fields the whole time.
Yeah. It's a very interesting story, of course, and a very interesting intersection as well. And one that, as Genomes.io, we also genuinely believe in. I want to dive into a little bit the tension where ethics meets practicality. So one of the things that we've discovered on our journey, and this might be, somewhat internal cuisine for people who are not necessarily familiar with DeSci, but, this is a DeSci interview. So we're going to provide loads of links in the show notes so people can read up on it. But saying that you want your data to be safe is a very easy thing to say. It's like saying, I'm in favor of world peace. But what we sometimes see is that the lip service that many people deliver to us or contribute to us, they have the best of intentions saying, I want to keep my data safe. Sometimes there's a bit of a tension between what they're saying and the actions they are prepared to take to keep their data safe. Because in this day and age of technology, even though it is rapidly evolving and loads of things are facilitated and it's getting easier and easier, you are asking at the end of the day for people maybe to spend 20, maybe 30 seconds extra to keep their data safe. And on some levels, sometimes we encounter some resistance and people thinking, well, that's not normal because they're just used to their data going into these big rabbit holes, in the normal world, as they say. And they don't understand why all of a sudden they need to spend a bit more time to keep their data safe. Is that something you've seen as well? Is that something you've encountered as well on your path?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just getting a pen and paper because there's so many different points I want to respond to in there. I want to take notes. But I think that you're absolutely right. And the main thing is that people don't understand the value of their data. And that is like a big misconception because they effectively, if they were to understand like, oh, I need to do, this little extra precaution to keep my brand new lovely car safe or insured off the road, then like I would do it because I understand what the value of my car is, and I use it every day and it costs me X amount of money. But when it comes to, what researchers use your genomic or other multi-omic information for to discover new markers to treat diseases, people are somewhat removed from that whole industry. And it's kind of hard for them to wrap their head around what scientists do and the value in the economy of biomedical data that feeds these pipelines that scientists use to discover new markers for diseases. So I think that and only crypto can solve this, right? Only crypto can actually make a transparent economic backend to see how much money moves in between different places for different research assets, different new insights that are broken. And so when that changes, then people will be far more protective, right? Because like right now, we only understand the value of your data when it's hacked or when it's leaked. And that is a problem, right? Because then you're only ever going to be, retroactively trying to fix what you should have done proactively. And I think that if we upfront make it clear that like you need to have your data on you because that's how you get care, for example. You go into the doctor and you show everything, and then you need to have your stuff there. And if you don't have it, then you can't get the best treatment. Or, you have your sequencing done so that when you get prescribed drugs, for example, you can get accurate drugs. Then people start to see the value of having their data on them, and then they start to understand the value of protecting that. And right now, the things are too separated, right? Consenting is just like a one-way street. It's like a way for researchers right now to basically waive the liability of anything potentially going wrong with what they may or may not do with someone's valuable insights, right? So the understandings are too separated, and I think we can bridge that with crypto.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I like about AminoChain, because you offer incentives on both sides of the aisle, right? So you brought up a very relevant thing here that researchers of origin are used to just have the data taken from the patient. Going back to your example that the doctor showed you your tissue, you couldn't take it home. It stays in the lab effectively, right? It is shelved. They don't necessarily do anything with it. But I think many people in research are just used to having the data available. And if I understand AminoChain correctly, it is also just lying there. And many of these research institutions are also now pushed to look for new models to share, if not commercialize it, for the sustainability of the organization that they operate in or under. And AminoChain can also give them those bits and bobs so they can start finding new models for their biobanks, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, consenting is such an important part of biobanking. I mean, it's the linchpin of everything that holds it together. If you don't have consent to begin with, then you can't do anything with any of these valuable bioassets that you try to use. But the incentives have been switched in the current practice today, which basically means that if you have all this valuable data, you basically just want to go to the research participant and get permission to do with whatever you want with it, right? So that you then have broad consent, or you have as much, leeway as possible. But then, of course, you're not balancing the patient's autonomy and you're not genuinely engaging them in the research process. Then again, on the flip side, if you give all of the keys to the patient and you say, anytime I want to do anything with it as a researcher, I have to ask you, and you can dynamically say yes or no, then you also block research outcomes. Then you have a lot of scientists that say, well, this is really messing with my, pipelines because I can't wait every 2 weeks to get consent to do the next bit of my research that I want to do. And also you have consent fatigue. You have these patients, these research participants that don't really want to consistently respond to notifications and improve things. So basically this consistent trade-off in bioethics is between balancing patient autonomy and maximizing benefits of research. And we think that we can bridge the two of those by having a decentralized custodianship model on a blockchain. And that basically means that patients can give personalized conditions for broad use, and they have a consistent provision of information. They can always log on and see what's happening with their stuff. And their stuff will never be used with outside of the parameters of what they initially consented for, which gives the researcher broad use, and they can do whatever they want with it as long as it's within the parameters of the consent. And we have an automatic way to relay the information back to the research participant. And then, of course, in certain settings where it's needed and according to local laws, you can let people opt out and have the right to be forgotten and, burn any existing data that's attached to their profile. But you start off with a premise that's positively reinforcing for both the research participant and the researcher.
Yeah. One question, and again, this is internal cuisine, and then I'll promise we'll take it to a higher level. But we've seen a difference in data that is already there versus data that is likely to come in the future. So when we speak to organizations, and we're looking into genomic data in a different setting, in a different model, but at the end of the day, it's also about helping organizations to manage genomic data more equitably in a safer way, in a more transparent way. And what we've seen is that if the data is already there, let's say it's already been within the premises of the institution for 20 odd years, then it's difficult to get all the permissions and consents for data that was previously donated versus data that is coming into the future. Mm-hmm. Is that something you recognize? And if so, how do you solve that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of thoughts on this. AminoChain in general is just a blockchain protocol that can authenticate patients. It aggregates biosamples and data sets for research. And we have a series of benefit sharing mechanisms, which means incentive mechanisms for patients to be recontacted and to consent and donate samples and so on. So that's like the basics of this protocol. And this protocol in action creates a decentralized biobank. And we have the capacity for other biorepositories to join the decentralized biobank. And we have ways to build out new data sets ourselves to feed data into this decentralized biobank. And what you were speaking about there earlier was getting other biobanks to join this network makes you reliant on the data and the quality that they have already. And that is really difficult, especially in our instance, because we've now worked with roughly 25 biobanks around the world, and we've got around 400,000 biosamples aggregated across this network of repositories. But we're very reliant on the metadata of their collections that they can provide. So if we say, did this breast cancer sample have this marker or not? They'll say the pathologist did that report and I don't know where they are and I can't find them, and that's your problem. That means that you then end up having low quality analytics on your marketplace. And theoretically, you could go and invest in that institution and you could provide capital and you could do all sorts of stuff to characterize the collections even better and to make sure that you have high quality standards and data on your then marketplace or search engine. But that is very time consuming and you're reliant on other people to get through legal reviews and bureaucracy and whatever. So the flip side of that is you owning the process from start to finish. And that's more of you could create your own study. You can send people within a certain indication. It can be an autoimmune disease or a cancer or whatever you want. And you then collect the samples, you pay to do all the assays and all the data generation, and you bank the stuff somewhere. And that's, of course, very, roll up your sleeves and do it yourself. But at the end of it, you end up with very, very high quality data. that you can onto the platform. And so we are now in the transition period of starting to build out these own prospective collection capacities and building out this own donor network from the get-go. And all of that will be on-chain from start to finish. Yeah, we've been thinking very carefully around what we want to do first and what kind of data we want to generate and how we want to set that system up.
Yeah. And sorry, I didn't mean to kind of give you that the model is flawed. It's not at all, but there are challenges along the way, right? So it's very important to look at it from every single angle. And I think you're right in saying, the data of the highest quality will go the furthest, will be most beneficial to whatever scientific progress you're looking at, whatever you want to achieve. Like if you can bring it all together, and if the samples are really good, then that really helps to advance the research that got you into this in the first place. So yeah, that's very interesting. As two biotech founders, we would be amiss not to address artificial intelligence. And I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but what is your kind of version of events when it comes to AI?
Yeah. So again, plenty of thoughts here. We could, do a whole hour on just this, of course.
Yeah.
So, where do we see the real opportunities with AI and where have we really been implementing it? So in quite a few ways. The first one really is that, as we mentioned, all these different biobanks out there, they have these different biosample collections and different metadata on their collections. Some people might call a specimen a glioblastoma from a Caucasian male, for example, and another biobank would call the same specimen brain cancer tissue from a white man, right? We just use synonyms of each other to describe the same specimen, right? So if you're building a universal search platform, you need to have a way to map these two things against each other so that if you're looking for Caucasian, you also get white, you also get, European or whatever. And the subterms are mapped against each other. So how we use AI, or the first way we used AI is we went to all these different biobanks and we built a pipeline that can ingest unstructured metadata on biosample collections, and it can map and data engineer these into a universal search schema. And our pipeline, we call it the harmonizer, is now up to 80%. When you get a new unstructured data set, it could map to our existing schema. And that means people could manually go through and map the last bits. But we can then onboard new repositories very quickly based on the existing fields that we have that we're trying to map. So that's one really great use of AI that we Another one, which is kind of completely on the other side, and kind of interesting, is we've noticed consistently on LinkedIn that people are using all these LLMs to build seemingly dead simple consumer apps, with AI. AI Uber for dogs, for example, or an AI note taker or a content writer or something, whatever it is. But a lot of people on X and LinkedIn are posting about making all this money very quickly just because it's so easy to build AI-enabled apps. And that made me think, well, what if we did something similar, but we used all the money from these AI apps to fund rare disease research? And it would be great because all the money that we raised would be effectively charitable money. And we could then use this to sponsor data to be made. And we put it into our biobank, but it's open access. And there's no payment gate and there's no expectation of return. But it still proves the point, and it shows how incenting works. And we have a decentralized governance of valuable research data and so on. So it's a win-win for us because we ended up getting people to use the system, even though we're not making a return on it. And of course, we're generating data sets on people that need it the most that would otherwise get no sponsorship. And the way to do that is by leveraging things like Lovable and other vibe coding platforms to build really easy apps that can then live on, right? And that can make money for this charity consistently. And so I don't want to jump the gun, but we're now going to host a hackathon in December to that effect, where we're going to get folks together and they're going to help us build some amazing apps. And then these apps will be used for a charity that will fund rare disease research on an open biobank. So that's a whole thing that we're working on. So those are the two main things, right? Is when we think about AI.
And there might be many more in the future, right? That's also one of the things. Where do you see the wrong use case for AI, specifically when we're talking about, data safety, keeping the data with the patient, transparency. So to give you an example, there was this interview with Sam Altman and with Theo Von and about OpenAI, and he kind of said, don't use ChatGPT as your therapist, because the data you pour in there are no privacy settings, or there's nothing that says that we're not able to share. We can share. It's kind of you're basically pouring it into a public domain. We also got approached a lot whereby people ask us about, oh, wouldn't it be great to just give us the genomic data that you have vaulted, because it would be so advantageous to research. And we said, no, we don't think that that's a good idea. So but I mean, people ask, right? So there are loads of things whereby AI is all of a sudden this this big light in our lives that's gonna resolve all our problems, undo all injustice, and all privacy and safety settings are out of the door. Where do you think we should draw the line? That's essentially my question.
Well, I mean, wherever we draw the line, I know that, genomic data is far on the one side of the line. So I think it shouldn't be drawn anywhere near that, right? I think we should certainly be protecting our DNA data very, very well. But it's interesting because, these LLMs, of course, as we know, they're trained on text, right? So they're just text recognition neural networks, basically, right? So companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and others, they basically train on text and they build a brain. And there's this artificial brain that can do tasks. So now the question is, do you want to ask the brain to do something with data as the same way you'd be asking a person to do something with, information? Or do you want to then give this information to make the brain even smarter and train itself and become bigger? And there are some ways to host locally and to not share data towards the public service. But if you right now went on to ChatGPT and just uploaded a raw FASTQ file of your data set, undoubtedly it would, use that to train itself. But there are some ways, I think, that you can, use these LLMs as sort of local instances, and you can get them to give analytics without necessarily training or revealing that data to be trained in the brain itself. And I think that we need to make strong regulations around proving that if you do use LLMs for any sort of perhaps an AI-based diagnostic tool or a genetic analysis tool, whatever it might be, that was done on a very local instance, and it was run on private servers, for example, and it wasn't pinged to the central OpenAI training algorithm so that all that data would be leaked. I think that we should be able to use these tools by all means. It's just more about where these things are hosted and how we reveal the data.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what we have a responsibility to do is to continue to make sure that people care about that, because I think that's as comfort and kind of workarounds, ease of interpretation, ease of understanding things, us effectively having loads more facilitated to us by AI, whichever profession we have, whether we're in the medical profession or whether we're a teacher, AI is going to help people. It's going to be aid on loads of levels. And I think history has shown us is that those levels of comfort and ease come with a price. And the price is very often our privacy and our safety. Yeah. So I think that is something for us to continuously be mindful of before, everything is in the open and we've reached a point of no return, right? That would be the other end of the stick. And specifically, as you said, in genomics, there are people who have already been saying, for instance, on this level of next generation sequencing, there are so many new sequencing methods out there to kind of have your genome decoded, to have all of that available to you. But that comes at a price. And many scientists, genetic scientists, stand up. It's as much as we've invested in all these sequencing methods, now it's time to also invest in security technologies that keep the data safe, because there will be hell to pay if it falls into the hands of someone who has malicious intent, right? Exactly. With the data. So we need to also think about how to protect it and to keep it safe. And I'm very happy AminoChain is also doing their fair bit on that level. So that's an interesting topic. And as you said already, we can talk for hours here about those things. Casper, let's go to crypto, because you are someone who is, with 3 master degrees, very much on the science and very much talking about the data. What got you into crypto? When did you find out that Web3 and crypto was going to enable you to do these things? Was that right away kind of love at first sight, or how did you roll into that specific bit?
It's a great question. So the first time I ever heard of the word Bitcoin, I think it was the first crypto adjacent word that I heard. And it really is so painful to admit this, but the first time I heard somebody be like, oh, I bought this thing called Bitcoin was, I think, in 2013 or 14. And if I had paid attention to what he was actually talking about, I mean, that would have been a very successful financial outcome. But anyway, it was oh, cool, this is cryptocurrency. And then at that time, I think maybe it spiked to 4K or something. And then it went back down to so it was just at that point where it was on one of the rallies and then crashes. And someone was like, this thing is really interesting, you should watch it. And then I was like, oh, cool. What is a blockchain? What is a cryptocurrency? What is a Bitcoin? And it was just curious to learn about the topics. But then I never really became a professional in it, and I found it super confusing, as I'm sure a lot of people do. Then 3 years later, when I was in undergraduate degree and I was living in London with some friends, my roommates said, hey, we're gonna go home tonight and we're gonna have a couple beers and we're gonna try buy some Ripple, and it's this next cool thing. It's like a payment mechanism on a blockchain, and it's gonna change everything because there's no fees involved. And again, I was like, this is really interesting, but I have no idea what you're talking about. What's the difference between a blockchain and a cryptocurrency and a coin? And what's a wallet? And this is all just way too confusing. And I guess there was no clear UX in it, and it all felt really sketchy. So I was just I'm going to stay away from this thing. And then again, 3 years later, interestingly, it happens always in 3 years, but then it became 2020 and we had a huge crypto rally. And at that point, NFTs started to become a thing. And then I got really interested being oh, that's the difference between a blockchain and an asset on a blockchain. Because you can have money on chains, which are coins, or you can have NFTs, which are digital assets. How is a picture a record on a blockchain? And then I was oh, that makes a lot of sense. There's nobody running this in the back end. There's cryptography. It's just a platform where you can own things. That's fascinating. And then immediately I started to think about all the ways that it could be applied to healthcare, especially NFTs. And I was like, that's really interesting. I was like, okay, so let's tokenize medical records. That sounds like it's an interesting thing to do. Or what if we tokenize a CAT scan or an X-ray? Imagine that. Imagine you could sell that. That's super cool. And then I started to toy around with it and research it. And it turns out that since 2018, a bunch of other companies had similar ideas of putting medical records on a blockchain or medical assets on a blockchain in some way. And then I was interesting. Some people have tried it like this. Some people have tried it like that. And then I just got really sucked into this rabbit hole of there must be something that this can really fit in quite nicely with, right? So specifically NFTs. And then eventually it was around the same time I was in the lab and I was holding this cancer sample and I was like, oh my God, what if we tokenize this thing? What would happen here? And then I looked into it more and more, and it just kept making more sense, being these people don't know what happens with their samples. You can track it. You can get rewards from it. You can give personalized consent as metadata of the token and so on. Yeah. And then I was like, wow, this is really a good use case of the technology. And then that just pulled me in deeper and deeper. Yeah. It then became a platform to decentralize stem cell donations. And then it became a platform for, just an NFT marketplace for biobanks in general. And now this has evolved into a whole, decentralized data bank with, still on-chain records of samples, but not necessarily tokens anymore. And so that then, just meant I learned more and more and more about crypto by virtue of, I guess the thing that tipped it was the fascination of what an NFT is in 2020.
Yeah. And so you talk a lot about the tokenization, and you said, I think, you fell in love with the technology of what it could do, not as much kind of the token as in kind of the bling, the money that could be made out of it. AminoChain doesn't have a token at this moment. Is that correct? No.
That is correct. Yes, we don't.
No plans?
The one thing that we learned in the A16Z crypto startup school, the CSX program last year, was that if you launch a token before you have product market fit, you have one surefire way of killing all credibility in your protocol. So I think there has to be a very, carefully designed system of what they call faucets and sinks, which is plans for tokens to be made, plans for tokens to be burnt, and a very clever mechanism to grow the economic value of your protocol overall. You need to have a token to incentivize security of the protocol. You need to have it for, payments and incentives and so on. And it's really hard to do that in any business unless you have a clear picture of services, revenue, and, liabilities and assets and so on. And it's even harder to do that in healthcare because healthcare is even more difficult to build in than any other normal business. So I think that we are certainly open to the idea of launching a token. And matter of fact, we definitely are interested in doing it, but you will not find us, talking about any token plans publicly or privately up until we have the most elegantly, beautifully designed token model that makes perfect sense and is free of any sort of speculative risk, right? And that's, of course, very hard to do. But we're gonna do our best.
No, I hear you. We were part not of the A16Z startup school, but the consensus one. So we were accelerated by Tachyon, which is the consensus incubator at the time. I think it's now Consensus Mesh. They've also been on this specific podcast. I've interviewed them a few weeks back. They kind of said the last thing you want to do is push out the token immediately. So it took us 3 to 4 years before we introduced our token. Amazing. And we only did it at the moment that we had a very, very clear use case. And still, it's not crystal clear. It didn't go, it did great things, don't get me wrong, but it also did things that we did not anticipate. And you need to set up operations. You need to be prepared if that happens, because, whether you like it to be speculative, yes or no, other people might, right? So it's not necessarily what you wish. You're putting your company out there and tokens of your company for all to use, however they see fit. Even though you have a clear use case for that in mind, that might not be the use case that someone else has. And you cannot exercise any control over that. So that's unfortunate, but that's the downside of doing that. There are also upsides, but I do hear you, and I do hear your backers saying, be very mindful. Yeah.
So great. I also think that, it's so interesting to learn from your experience there and listen to, how it played out for genomes. But I think that it's really, you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned it has unpredictable outcomes. You can plan it so well, and you can have token lockups. You can have all these things to make sure that you try to introduce some kind of stability into making sure the thing doesn't bounce around. It's still a kind of a publicly traded asset, and there will be people, just because it is crypto, there will be people that unfortunately buy things as early as they can and then try to make a quick buck and drop it. Yeah. And that, of course, has big effects on the rest of the users that would be using it. So it's a very difficult thing to design, well. And then I think as well that there's hopefully going to be very different guidance on crypto assets very soon, especially in the US. I'd like to think that in 5 years' time, launching a token would be as legitimate as doing an IPO, and there would be some structured way to do it and registered with the SEC and the amount that you do and whatever. So then we can actually protect people, and there's more of a legitimate way to get institutional investing, and you take away the speculative side of, people trying to make a quick buck. Hopefully that'll all change very soon. But it's tumultuous times. We need to approach it with caution.
Yeah, I think you're right. My hope is as well that, two things. There's going to be a lot more regulation, because it needs regulation. Regulation is needed so these tokens can be used for the right reasons and the right purposes. Second to that is the token, as you say, I'm a very big advocate of giving each token a utility, right? So there needs to be a reason why this token is there. The token represents a story, whatever that story is, right? In our case, it's scientific. There's data, there's the monetization of data, the safety of data, the transparency when you use the data, kind of those things. Those are very important things. But there can be many other use cases, as long as there is one. Because I do think that, I'm not a big fan of the meme coins, but they're only doing one thing because they just lead to short-term speculation. And it pollutes kind of what we want people to understand of the token, that the token is kind of this gateway into freedom, right? Freedom for your health, or freedom for your finances, or freedom for whatever it is, but not just like short-term speculation, short-term pump and dump and in and out. Because if we only go for that, then the market will cease to exist. The market needs utility to sustain and to grow, So I'm a firm believer in that, but I'm obviously not the only one. So, I hope we can get the people the movers and shakers, look into the same direction to make sure that we do the right thing here.
Yeah. I totally agree. Totally agree. It's the computer versus the casino, as Chris Dixon said in his book. It's you need to decouple the two. But
yeah. Casper, I have the feeling we can talk for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time. We need to continue both our individual quests to save the world. So before I ask my last question, I was curious to know, you have such an impressive resume, but what are you most proud of in your journey thus far?
It's such a lovely question. Thank you for that. What am I most proud of? I'd like to think the thing that I'm most proud of is yet to come. I have like a big personal goal or ambition to, the second that somebody says your platform affected my life, or in some way it affected my condition, or it gave me back a piece of information, or it made me eligible for a trial, or it's exactly what I've been looking for. Whatever. The second we actually change the conditions or the prognosis of a disease for like one person, then like that's it. Then I'm happy that anything on top of that is even better. But if 5 years of work and we affected one patient's life, I would do it all again in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think that would be the thing I'm most proud of. Like, the second somebody says to me, "Thank you so much for building what you did because it helped me in whatever way," that's phenomenal. And the second goal, which I'm most proud of, is something I really want to strive towards. Is my third master's degree is master degree in bioethics. I'm doing part-time at Harvard Medical School right now. This semester, I'm cross-registering into some classes at Harvard Business School. So I'm in and out of Boston 2 days a week, taking some classes at HBS and seeing the case method and seeing how people talk about companies and problems they faced and how they decided to grow and strategic decisions they have to make. It made me super interested in seeing how people learn about the business of biobanking and the business of, tokenomics and the business of bioethics and so on. And so my dreamt up vision as well, and one thing I'd be unbelievably proud of, is one day for there to be a Harvard Business School case study on AminoChain and how to build a very successful business by putting bioethics at the heart of your business model. If you care for the patient and their experience and everything that is important to them first and foremost, then downstream everybody benefits because you get more samples, more data, and more drugs.
Yeah.
If we can prove that, I'll be most proud.
Nice. Well, that's very admirable. And Harvard Business School, if you're listening, use AminoChain as a use case. Let's spread the word on this great mission. My very last question then, Casper. I ask it to every guest, and it's actually about reading. So I always wonder what reading has inspired you. Going back to 12-year-old Casper, it was, of course, the surgery that you had, but has there also been any reading that kind of set you on fire in your growth? And let me start with my reading, because it's actually one book that inspired me is the book, The Power of One by Bryce Courtenay, which is all about South Africa. And I don't know why. It's a novel, and I think I was in my early 20s when I read it. But I just thought it just opens up so much. It's about this individual resilience, about this guy PK who becomes a boxer, and then there's the story of South Africa also in the background. Of course, I've read many non-fiction books and business books and whatever, but that's reading that inspired me. So do you have something that, and it doesn't have to be a book, it could also be a platform or an author or something that you like. But if you care to share, now is the time.
It's a really great question because there's like many different ways in which, books have affected what I'm doing. And so in different readings, in different contexts. I mean, so The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, of course, is a phenomenal book. And, when you read it, it's hard to not have your heart race being like, I need to get back to work. Because the quicker I build, the quicker I can build something that would fix this and I can do it for the right legacy and so on. That is, of course, an unbelievably inspiring story. But then, practically as well, I think that the two books that came out from, I think, different people at A16Z recently. So there's The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is by Ben Horowitz. I've never felt so seen as a founder when I was reading this book, because, I mean, it's a lonely journey and you're building something crazy and it doesn't make sense. And like all these things that you think only you face, like you have to hire a best friend, or you have to hire someone that's like expensive and old, but very well tenured, but they don't have the right cultural fit. And how do you motivate people, and how do you close rounds, and like all of the things that you think you could possibly face, Ben Horowitz has a small chapter on in his book, and it is like therapy reading that. So I think that was the most recent one that I read that was really amazing.
Nice.
And then of course Chris Dixon's book Read, Write, Own, I read very recently. And that, again, is one where you can't help but have your heart race, because they talk about protocols, the evolution of the internet, and like how crypto can help decentralize and what decentralized technologies are. But the use cases are like, not fully fleshed out yet because we're so new into the technology. So you have a vision of how the technology can be applied to healthcare and to whatever else, but they don't mention it in the book, right? So that is super exciting as well to me. I mean, like, I need to get back to work, when I read this and so on. So those are a few that come to mind.
Nice. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and Read, Write, Own. We'll be sure to include them in our show notes so people can have a look at those books as well. And you've made me curious. I've read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, but the other two I've heard about but haven't read yet. So that's definitely going on my reading list.
And The Power of
Caspar
One.
Barnes.
And
The Power of One. I get The Power of One. It's a novel. Do it on a holiday. It's like, it's just, it's not founder focused, but it's good for the heart, I would say. Caspar Barnes, thank you so much for your time. Undoubtedly, we're going to hear a lot more about you and AminoChain. If people want to find out more, they can go to aminochain.io, and we'll be sure to include also all the links to the socials for AminoChain in our show notes. Casper, once more, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Aldo. It was unbelievable fun. Really enjoyed it, and hope to come back again sometime.
You've listened to Pulse by AlphaWire, produced by Natalie Piles and Amela Faisal, with great music, The Optimist, written by Holly Hamill, performed and produced by ALO. Episodes hosted weekly by me, Aldo de Pape.